Today, Jeff and I will be talking with Connor T. Lewis. Connor is a huge collector. He has a podcast of his own. We're so excited to get to talk with him today about British Isles and some of the items that he collects, including his hickory wood shafts that he loves so much. We're very excited and enjoy.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Travel Royally podcast. Thank you for joining us. We're thrilled today to have our new friend, Connor T. Lewis. He is a real estate developer for medical buildings around the country. That's his day job, but his passion is he's the founder and CEO of the Society of Golf Historians, and he's the host of Talking Golf History, that podcast. I'm a huge fan. We'll tell you how you can listen to his podcast at the end, but we're absolutely thrilled to have you today, Connor. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you. This is going to be a good discussion. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, we are as well. So let's start at the beginning. How did you come to golf?
Wow. I came to golf really late in life. I guess you could blame my brother, Kevin, who's 4 years younger than I am. I didn't play golf in high school. Oddly enough, I actually grew up on one of the two courses that can claim to be the oldest golf course west of the Mississippi. That was Fairfield Golf and Country Club in Fairfield, Iowa. It was founded in 1892. We believe it's slightly older than the golf course in Oregon. Am I going to blank on this or not? I'm going to blank on it. It's on the seaside, not Gresham. Anyway, both are 1892. Fairfield was founded in like March. So, I guess you'd have to be January, February to beat it out. So I feel pretty good on that. But regardless, as I tell people, there's really not a big debate. If you're in the United States and your golf course was founded before 1895, you're in rare company. I think you could probably say 1899. So anyway, I grew up on this country club. I was a swimmer. My dad played golf. My mom played golf. I had zero interest. Went through high school not playing golf. Went through college not playing golf. And my brother picked up the game also out of college and asked me to play with him. And I went out there, I think like everybody, and just hacked it up. And it was awful. It was terrible. I couldn't understand why anybody would ever play this game. And it went a couple years after that, and a couple years after that. And I think right around the age of 28. So I'm going on my 20 years of golf now, weirdly enough. And I don't remember a lot other than being terrible. But then I think like most golfers, it takes one or two shots. And I'm sure they were lucky ones to really, grab you. And now I'm a single digit handicapper. I've been playing for 20 years and I've been very fortunate to, get to play golf in all these special places all around the United States and Scotland.
That's fantastic. Now, obviously, very quickly, you became enthralled with the game. So how did you come about starting the Society of Golf Historians?
Yeah, my life is a series of accidents, and they've all been lucky ones. I think Napoleon once said that he chose his generals by which of his men were most lucky. I might have been a general from a Napoleon in a different era. I fall into a lot of things. I love golf. I love history. I started playing hickory golf really prior to really being entangled in golf history. I just had this idea that it'd be neat. I was aware of like Bobby Jones and old Tom Morris and Walter Hagen. And a gentleman in Iowa, Russ Fisher and Bill Reed, introduced me to hickory golf. And I think as soon as I had my first set of clubs, shortly after that, I went to Scotland and played, some of the great golf courses with hickory shafted clubs. And for 7 years, I basically only played hickory golf. And then the last two of those, I only played gutty golf, which is like pre-1900 golf, which is another level of insane. And fast forward even through that process, I'm living in Florida. I was talking to a buddy who's played the top 100 golf courses in the United States, and Brian Knotza for the record. And he said something like, you should really go on Twitter. Like somebody would, care if you, talked about golf history on Twitter. And I've said this on my podcast before. I'm like, nobody's going to care. Like nobody cares about it. It's not like baseball history. We've been really lax, I think, promoting golf history beyond, say, Ben Hogan, right? So call that like the 1940s. Everything 1940s is like ancient history, and anything before that's widely been disregarded for decades in the game of golf. And so I got on there and I talked a little bit about architecture under the name Charles Blair McKenzie. It was so it's kind of Charles Blair McDonald and Alistair McKenzie.
Right.
And then he kind of challenged me again, you should have you should start something and do something. And so I did the Society of Golf Historians on kind of a whim, and I thought it would be clever. And then Rod Morey interviewed me for State of the Game on, the history of golf, or golf's quirky history, something like that. And damn it, I mean, the whole thing just took off. And I, at the time there, I was picking up 1,000 followers in a month. And, he encouraged me to do a podcast, of which I said the same thing, like, nobody's ever going to listen to this thing. And then you just end up doing it. And it was kind of an accident. And now it's, I don't know, I think between all of social media, we have roughly 50,000 followers of the Society of Golf Historians. I should call them members, because I don't charge anything to be a member of the Society of Golf Historians.
Yeah.
It just kind of blew up. It's kind of totally unprecedented, uncalled for, but a delightful surprise. So,
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting about that. The fact that people really don't follow or understand golf history pre Ben Hogan. I would agree with that. But there were wonderful golfers, American golfers, Francis Ouimet and Gene Sarazen and Walter Hagen. And
yeah,
there's a funny story. I don't know if you've heard this, but before they started banning's not the right word, but notifying former Open champions that you're too old to play. I think it's over 60 now. Gene Sarazen was in his 70s and he played at Troon. And he wasn't going to make the cut, but the 2 days that he played postage stamp, he played it in a total of 3 strokes.
Yeah.
He had a hole in one and a birdie. I mean,
yeah. Unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
and so many great stories from that era. I think, like I said, I mean, I think there are people that are way better go-tos from like 1940 to 2022 when we talk history. I have a deep appreciation for the Hickory era, Bobby Jones, Walter Hagen, Gene Sarazen, Tommy Armour, the like. And then, further back is, I just think, I honestly, and this is a weird way to put it, it's the sexiest part of golf history, because there's like basically how the game was formed happened in that kind of fungible, malleable era of golf. And you can see all the things we do today are kind of based in that, call it 1880 to 1935 era. Everything we know as golf today is kind of like formalized there, including the idea of rolling back the golf ball, right? That came in the 1920s. So
yeah.
You can see a lot of echoes in history as you look at the present game.
Well, I think there were concerns about equipment back then too.
Yeah.
Right.
100%. Yeah.
And I've got a great idea for a podcast for you.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay.
Starts here. Go.
Okay. You know how you do your research and you uncover something that you didn't expect.
Yeah, all the time. I'd say 80% of the time I find a story that I was not even searching for.
Okay. So I bought a golf club from the UK and it was made by a guy named Ernie Jones. Have you ever heard of him?
Ernest Jones? Yes.
Yes. You've heard his story.
I don't know if I know his story. I just know the name.
Okay. So he was a young guy that was born in around 1900. He was born in Manchester, and he was apprenticed. No, he had to be born before that. He was apprenticed at 16 to be a golf club maker. And so he's probably born around 1890. So in 1908, 1 year, he was at Prestatyn Golf Club in Wales. And the club that I have has Ernest Jones Prestatyn Golf Club.
Very cool.
So I'm like, I want to hear about this guy. So I did the research. So he was a club maker, professional. This is after the time where they would have been making balls, but he was a club maker. And he was a very good golfer. He played in the Open 3 or 4 times, never finished outside the top 30. Got called up to World War I and had his right leg blown off.
Oh, wow.
By a landmine. So he comes back to England to recuperate. And as soon as he's able to stand, he goes out and plays a round of golf on one leg, walking between shots on crutches. And he gets to, he finishes the first 9 even par. So Hayden, what you need to understand is that back then, shooting even par was hard, right? Open scores were in the upper 70s at this time.
Yeah.
He got tired, and I forget what his overall score was, but it was probably 78 or something like, in the high 70s.
Yeah, solid score.
So he moves to New York. He opens he starts teaching golf in the city in a high-rise building in New York City. And I can't remember whether it was Madison Avenue or Fifth Avenue, but he's got high ceilings, and he put a big, heavy canvas up against the wall. And he gave more lessons than any other pro for several years because he was doing up to 5,000 lessons a year.
Yeah, doing them at night. Yeah, right.
And when he came over, originally he was the golf pro at, I should have done my research beforehand, but a women's club on Long Island.
Was it the National Women's Golf Club? That's
it. Yeah. And so he died in the 60s, but for over 30 years, he had a place. He was giving lessons in New York, and he wrote books. And, one of his lessons, because he learned a lot from having to play on one leg.
Yeah.
And it changed the way he thought about, how can I still play great golf on one leg? And he got fascinated about how you turn. And he had this exercise where you would take a handkerchief, like men carried handkerchiefs back then, and you tie a penknife at the bottom. And I don't know how you swing it without getting stabbed or poking an eye out.
Right.
But it was one of those stories like how they should make a movie about this guy's life. And you can bet.
An instructional book too. I seem to remember seeing an instructional book by Ernest Jones as well.
Yeah.
And it's crazy.
What I'll do is for a while during a captain when a friend of mine was captain of the Murray Golf Club, I was the unofficial club historian and would write articles about the club and golf history. And so I wrote one about him, comparing him at the time to the guy in the Dos Equis commercial.
The most interesting.
Yeah. And then I said, by golf standards, Miguel Angel Jimenez is very similar to the guy but I would propose that Ernest Jones is the most interesting man in golf. So that's awesome. I'll send it to you. Anyway, that was a long version. So how did you start collecting?
What was that?
So I was saying people can barely play golf on 2 legs. This guy's shooting even on one leg.
So how did you start collecting?
My first thing was probably those hickory shafted clubs from. And I got into it. I got into it really fierce. I'm looking at a set across the room, as a matter of fact, that's very similar to what I ended up getting. But I decided I was going to go to Scotland, and I was going to play the Old Course in Prestwick. Played North Berwick, Muirfield, the Honorable Company of Edinburgh golfers. And I wanted to do it right. So it wasn't just enough that, once I picked up these hickory shafted clubs, it wasn't enough that I just wanted to hit them, but they had to have some meaning. And so in talking to Bill and Russ at the time, I was like, what's the greatest set of hickory shafted clubs you can get or you can buy? And their recommendation at the time was a set of Tom Stewart RTJs, right? And a little bit of history here, but Tom Stewart was the greatest club maker of his era, of the hickory era, really. He made clubs for Bobby Jones. He made them for Gene Saracen, Tommy Armour, Harry Vardon, James Braid. I mean, you name it. Francis Ouimet won the Open Championship, or the U.S. Open in 1913, playing Tom Stewart clubs from St. Andrews. And so this RTJ set, came about, we think, around 1926. So 1926 to 1931, Tom Stewart was asked by Bob Jones to make him a set when he made one of those first tours of Scotland. So he made him a set, and, all were customized for Bob Jones' liking. And, they weren't really stamped with anything other than maybe Bobby Jones' signature, which I have one of those clubs behind us here too. So Robert Tyre Jones Jr. would be the signature on the back of the club. And what happened, or what we believe happened, somewhere between 1926 and 1930, Tom Stewart found himself essentially making, it's hard to call it a bootleg set, but he didn't have permission from Bob Jones to use his initials. And he started stamping these special forged clubs that he made, RTJ, on the toe of the club. So you could buy technically a set. I think I should count them. I have a full set in the corner here, and I don't want to screw this up. I want to say there were 11 clubs in the set. It included the Calamity Jane putter. Might have been 12. Anyway, the full set, and he'd stamp them RTJ. And they are amongst some of the rarest irons, in the world, really. I mean, I think from these match set standpoints, there may be 5 of these sets that I have in my office here. There's maybe 5 known out there that are full 12. And so I decided that's what I had to play if I was going to Scotland. And Ross and Bill were like, yeah, you're not going to get a set like that. And I had no hopes of getting a full set, but I thought getting a 1 iron through a niblick, which would be maybe 8 clubs of the 12, 8 of the 11, 12, whatever that number is. And I thought, I just want a playable set. So they still said, no, you can't get them. You're never going to find it. And I put together a plan that I've used many times since when I have to find something that is rare, which is I have a very large group of collectors. The Golf Heritage Society, for instance, is a great group of collectors. And I would go to 5 people and I'd say, I'm trying to find this club or this set in this case. Do you know where do you have it? They'd say no. Okay, can you name 5 people that might have it? And each of the 5 are naming 5. So now I have 25 people. So I reach out to each one of them, and if they don't find it, I ask for 5 people. And I basically scour the earth. And I think about a month's time, I had a set. So, that's an industry level secret that I've used that's now out there. But, if you ever really want to find something, there's great networks, and you can use my method to track down almost anything. I guess it doesn't have to be golf history related, but it could probably be just about anything. So I bought a set and I went over there and I had played, the old course. I think I shot a 79 using hickory shafts at the old course. And after that round, it was probably only my second or third round playing hickories. I just said to myself, well, gosh, if I can shoot in the 70s, why the heck would I play modern equipment? And that started that kind of 7-year odyssey of just playing hickory equipment that was only broken at Elm Crest Country Club in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, when I was playing with a guy who was playing moderns. And he was like, here, hit my brand new driver. And I hit it and it went like 310 yards. And I was like, oh man, it was like crap. I mean, it was like, I was hitting like 260, 250 yard drives with hickory. And all of a sudden like 50 yards just appeared. And I mean, then I started cheating and I was like, had a modern set, had a hickory set, had a gutty set. And then I went from a gutty set to, just a modern set. And now I have sets all around me, but I haven't really played hickory golf in a couple of years. So the collection kind of built from that. And the craziest part about this, to be honest with you, is I had a really firm idea in my head that I would never own anything in my collection like a golf club that I wouldn't use. So I literally took that to the nth degree. So as I mentioned, back in this corner over here, I own one of Bobby Jones's personal clubs. It's a Mashie Niblick from the 1920s, which again has his signature stamped on it, Robert Tyre Jones Jr. For about a year, that was in my play set. Wow. So, I won't tell you the value of that club today because I don't know it, but it's certainly in the 5 figures and it might be even in the 6. And I was swinging it freely on the golf course. I've gone to Marion where he finalized the Grand Slam, and I took it and I put it in my bag of modern equipment. And I had everybody in the group just, I was like, listen, you should hit it. And they were like, oh, yeah, I can't do it. And I just said, well, let's hit chips with it. So at least you can say you've hit a club that was owned and used by Bobby Jones. And just recently, that club and the bronze bust of Bobby Jones that I had in my office were on display at Oakmont Country Club for the last year's U.S. Amateur. And I think I can't remember, I think it was the day we took it out of the display case. I took it out to the 18th green and let a couple groups coming through chip some shots into the 18th green with it. So, it's hopefully a cool experience they'll always remember.
Yeah, that's very cool. I went to Musselboro.
Yeah.
About
one
10
of my
years.
favorite spots.
I know it's one of your favorite places. I went there about 10 years ago I took my buddies, and I took a Haskell ball and 3 of my clubs.
Yeah.
And we would take turns playing a hole with those 3 clubs, and including the Calamity Jane putter that I have.
Yeah.
And I remember parring 18 with those 3 clubs.
Yeah,
which
awesome,
is
right?
it's remarkable when you think about it. But anyway, I
had a magical shot. One of the greatest shots I ever hit in my life was at St. Andrews playing hickory shafted clubs. It's also a tragic story, not a tragic, like nobody died other than maybe my soul. But I had hit the ball into Hell Bunker, and I told the caddy I was going to hit it out with these hickory shafted clubs. And he's like, it's not possible. I'm not going to do a Scottish accent because I don't want to offend people. But he's like, it's just not possible. You can't get it there. And I was like, I feel strong about it. Anyway, I take a mighty swing, and my dad's standing behind me with my camera. And there's this photo of my follow through with a puff of sand, and how this puff of sand, almost like a nuclear explosion on top of it, is this golf ball. And it ends up like 4 feet from the flag. It was like the greatest shot I ever hit.
Wow.
And even better, this photo. And the very next day we played Musselburgh, and I dropped my camera somewhere on the course, and that photo, along with a photo of me standing with my father on Swilken Bridge, is gone. Now I have a photo with his camera somewhere in the office here of me standing on Swilken. I have a photo of him standing on Swilken, also taken with his camera, but not the one of us standing together. And to your point, it was on his 65th birthday.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
Tragic.
Well, you moved into art.
Oh yeah. I'm big in art. As you can see from behind me, I know that your viewer or the listeners can't, but big in art. I like 1800s art.
Yeah. I've collected old photographs of Murray.
Yeah.
Right. And including old postcards.
Yeah.
Where people had written, to someone, hey, we're having a lovely time at the beach in Lossiemouth. And I've got them hanging up in the guest bedroom that Hayden stayed in. But what's one of the most surprising things that you've learned about golf history that are, in your research that our listeners wouldn't know about?
That's a good question. I think one of my favorite stories from golf history, and there's lots of them, is I actually did a podcast on it, and it's called The Stolen Major. And I think that's one of the coolest events in golf history, in that, it takes place in the 1800s, which again is a forte of mine. It takes place in the 1890s, where we're still trying to understand, how golf is being played and what it looks like. And in the 1892 Open Championship was supposed to be played at Musselburgh, another, one of my underdog stories that I like to tell. And essentially what happened was the links were crowded, right? And this, you've played there. It's only 9 holes. It's always been 9 holes. It's hosted the Open Championship as a 9-hole course 6 times. So here it is. It's about ready to host it the 7th time in 1892. And the Honorable Company of Edinburgh Golfers, I think, just got fed up with the course conditions, because it was a crowded course of multiple clubs that belonged there, including Royal Musselburgh. And they just decided, we can't get on the course because it's overcrowded. It's not in the best shape because it's overcrowded, and we want our own golf course. So essentially in 1891, they hire old Tom Morris to build the 18-hole course on the land that they have today, which is Muirfield, right? So along this whole process, they're building this golf course, and the communication to the RNA to the folks at Musselburgh, to the players that were going to play in the Open Championship was, hey, we're going to have this Open Championship at Musselburgh. Well, that changed, and I might get the timing right, but I believe it was 85 days out prior to the Open, so less than 3 months. They decided, I wouldn't want to call it on a whim. The Open is no longer going to be played at Musselburgh. It's going to be played at our new course at Muirfield. And there was a huge uproar, a massive uproar, which quite frankly could have possibly ended the Open Championship and all history that followed, including our US Open, of course. So what happened is they pulled the plug, if you will. Folks from St. Andrews, folks from Musselburgh, folks from Edinburgh, all were upset that, they kind of did this on their own. And the agreement was that there was going to be a 3-course rota, which would include Musselburgh. It wasn't an agreement that would include Muirfield. So led by many people, but most importantly, Willie Park Jr. Willie Park Jr. decides he's going to throw a rival Open Championship, hold it on the same day, and double the prize money with his own money, by the way. So, it wasn't crazy money. It might have been like 50 pounds, right? Might have been less than that, but let's call it 50 pounds. So maybe it was 25 before. And Willie Park says, we're going to hold the Musselburgh Open, the true Open at Musselburgh, and we're going to give out double the pay. So all of a sudden you have a slew of players that are saying, well, I'd rather have the money. The Open is the Open. It's definitely important, but money was money. And these pros, they made their living by winning events. You could buy a house with your winnings. So all of a sudden money became important. And there was this, I'd say a month and a half long battle over the Musselburgh Open and the Open Championship. Where is it going to be held? We know the Open stayed at Muirfield. We know that Musselburgh Old is going to hold the Open at the Musselburgh Open, I should say. And there's this battle, and cooler heads prevailed, probably to the detriment of Musselburgh. And they moved their championship a week early, which turns out to have had almost the same field. And Willie Park Jr. won it. And in 1892, of course, the Open is played at Muirfield. It is in, I don't think it'd be exaggerated to say the course was in horrid condition. It was less than a year old. The grass was still coming up, treacherous conditions, and Harold Hilton ended up winning that Open. And it really kind of defined two things. One, the Open Championship never returned to Musselburgh. The 5 or 6 clubs that belonged to Musselburgh soon gravitated away from the club. And all of a sudden you had this hub of golf in Scotland, which many people don't realize was the near equal or the equal to St. Andrews. It rots away. You have all these club makers, right? Move to Edinburgh and move to other clubs. You have ball makers that move away, like Gourlay, and Willie Park Company moves away. And all of a sudden, it's just this deterioration of the ambiance of golf in Musselburgh to what we have today, which is a 9-hole golf course that is still competing to be relevant. When, folks go over on a tour, a lot of people overlook the 9-hole course. This course that's held 6 Opens, which was part of the original Open Rota. And all of those things can be rewound back to the stolen major. So to me, I just find that story fascinating because let's face it, if the Musselburgh Open was successful and they did compete with the Open Championship and the Open Championship just wasn't played, a couple things could have happened. One, the Musselburgh Open offering more funds becomes the dominant major event. I doubt that happens. But if that happens, this is 3 years before the US Open and the USGA are formed. And do we have a US Open that's based on the play of the Open Championship? There's so many different things that could categorically fail that would lead to not having 4 majors today, and all of them stem from that single event.
Yeah, well, I think in all likelihood, it would have died a death at some point just due to the fact that it was 9 holes. It's so tight.
Yeah.
25 years later.
The funny thing is there have been plans over 100 years old to expand to 18 holes. That land was available for Musselburgh. I want to say it was I want to say this was 1899, 1900, somewhere around there. There was a proposal to expand to 18 holes, and each time it got rejected. And so now we have, and as a matter of fact, even now it will never happen. But in the last decade, I would say that I chimed in. I would not say I was an advocate or any part of that discussion, but there was a plan to expand the golf course towards the Firth, right? So now there's a lot of land on the Firth there. And prior to that, most people don't know this, Musselburgh used to be on the sea. There's a hole there called the Sea Hole because it sat on the water. And because of mining and taking all of the rubbish, I guess, from mining and basically filling it out in the Firth, we now have this beautiful kind of parkland setting just outside the walls of Musselburgh that could be expanded to add another 9 holes, but will never be, in my opinion. Yeah. So, quirky history.
Well, 25 years later, Prestwick got shut down because it became too small to host the crowds and the players. And so you've talked about the Robert Trent Jones golf clubs, but are those your favorite piece of golf memorabilia, Young?
Now you're asking me to cheat. I don't know. That is a good question. My Bobby Jones club, I'm trying to think, it might be the most valuable thing. Got some things in here. It's funny, if we look back at the recent fire, right, of Oakland Hills, I've been in talks with a couple different clubs to, basically build a protocol. And the question is this, if the building's on fire and you can only save 3 things, what would you save? I might burn in my own fire. I don't know if I could make that decision. I don't look at things necessarily by how much they're worth. It's more of like their importance to, I don't know if it's me or the game. So like over my shoulder right there, that is one of the oldest scorecards known to exist from Leith Links. It's June 3rd, 1820. And the gentleman who played that round, John Condell, was actually one of the authors of one of the earliest books of the rules of golf for the Thistle Golf Club. And he shot a 81 on June 3rd, 1820 in a inter-club match. And I think I love this scorecard first for that history, right? You have an early author of the rules of golf. You have one of the oldest scorecards known to exist. But then underneath his score, he literally writes disgraceful. So it's kind of like, we know 81 sucked at Leith Links because he wrote disgraceful, and he was known to write notes on his scorecard. So there's things like that, and the paintings are all near and dear. One of the things that would be very hard for me to separate with, and I talked about it on my podcast with Mungo Park, is I have a photogravure of Willie Park Sr., who is the first golfer ever win the Open Championship, and it's relatively life size. If he were standing here, that's about how big his head would be. And it was made by the gentleman who took the photogravure is the gentleman who painted the full scale painting for the Park family, which now exists in the R&A clubhouse. And so I am a Musselburgh fan. He hails from Musselburgh. He won the first Open. It's very central to my collection for that reason. I have no idea what it's worth. And Mungo's writing a book soon on the Park and Musselburgh history, and that photogravure will be in the book. So I don't know. The Bobby Jones Club would be, I have a bronze bust of Bobby Jones. There are very few of them. There is one in the USGA museum. There's a version of it that sits in the Augusta National Clubhouse. And then one sits here in my golfus. That would be hard to get rid of, but I don't know. It's kind of like choosing which of your children you love the most. There's an answer, but you'll never tell them.
Right. Well,
I'm kidding.
Because Hayden's on this.
I'm kidding.
Because Hayden's with me, I can tell him that his wife is my favorite child.
That's right.
Mine.
That's right.
So I got one thing
My wife.
I have to tell you or ask you. I love this where you and Stephen Proctor had in your hands young
Yeah.
Tom's putter. What was that like?
Yeah, that whole experience was amazing. You know, I'm going to give you a flip side to that story. But, you know, we were sitting there with, I'm trying to think, it was, whose Open Championship medal was that? I'm blanking now. He had a falling out with the RNA.
Oh, yeah. Because it was gilded.
Yeah, it actually says British Open Champion on there. And I thought that's the only Open Championship medal I've ever seen that said British Open on it.
Was that Willie Park Jr.?
No, it was not. It was an American. It was somebody who had moved to the United States.
Oh, yeah. Jock Hutchinson?
Jock Hutchinson. That's exactly what it was. And I'll be honest with you, I was thrilled to have all those items in my hands. Now, I'm going to tell you the story behind this, because it's not a well-known story. There is some, I think, reputable intel that club was not owned by Tom Morris Jr. So
you learned this after the fact, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, obviously after the fact. So we had, released the podcast, and I think someone had listened to it who was an authority on, golf clubs, and basically said, this club would not have been around with these markings at that time. And what's interesting is it's one of these amazing facets about history, because think about the history of that club and, the provenance behind that club. I mean, it was in the World Golf Hall of Fame for like 50 years, right? You would not think that an item coming out of a museum with that reputation would have any questionable heritage behind it.
Right.
And yet here we are. So that
did it actually sell at auction?
No,
or was
it did not. They pulled it. They rightfully pulled it. I will not, it's definitely not the fault of heritage. They went with the provenance that was given to them by the World Golf Museum. I've seen that provenance. I've read that provenance, and it is strong. But it just goes to show you, when you have an item that's, near 150 years old, there's a lot of things that come into consideration beyond, this was sold to me, in the 1890s, and here's where it happened from there. There's also a distinction here to be talked about. And this is scary for, I think, not necessarily collectors, but it'd be interesting to really know how many young Tom Morris, I'm using quotation marks for you at home, clubs are out there. So back in the 1900s, I'd say early 1900s, maybe possibly late 1890s, Tom Morris had opened up young Tom Morris's locker that was in his shop at St. Andrews. And people would come by, and it was not abnormal, as the story goes, for old Tom Morris to give away young Tom Morris's clubs. And this happened for years. Now, I get what, old Tom Morris did not mean to deceive anybody, mind you. He was just keeping the spirit of his son alive. He's giving them away. He's not selling them. And as a result, there could be 100 clubs out there that have been some level of provenance from old Tom Morris, mind you, that they were young Tommy's clubs. And in fact, they were made in the shop maybe the day before and put back in that locker when he gave away the one prior.
Yeah.
So, it gets tricky, right? I mean, the funny thing is, in golf collecting, this isn't a great thing to say, but I'm going to say it is, if something has provenance, it's valuable, right? Assuming, someone finds valuable in that item. That doesn't necessarily mean it is what it is. It just has provenance that makes it valuable.
Yeah.
So if I sign my name, Bobby Jones on here, which I would never do, by the way, but if I signed Bobby Jones on this piece of leather and I sent it out, and I'm not saying, hopefully everybody would say that's fake, you're BS. But if there's one guy that says that's Bobby Jones's signature, this piece of leather has more valuable than the, scrap that it is.
Right.
And that's a risk collectors have to take. I mean, artwork, the same. I mean, these pieces, you have to do a lot of due diligence when you're collecting clubs, or art or anything to make sure you're buying, what is the real deal. And that's why it's also difficult for people who don't have that expertise. I've built my expertise over, 20 years of study. Doesn't mean everything is perfect, but at least, the things I have in my collection, the things I help people find, at least we have done, our due diligence to make sure they have what they're paying for, if you will. But
well, it seems to me that if you want to find an authentic Young Tom club, you need to go back to your old method of calling 5 people, have them give you 5 names. And
again, though, you run into the whole thing of, is it Young Tom's club, or did old Tom Morris give it away as one of Young Tom's? I mean, Young Tom had like 7 clubs. How can there be 100 of them? Right.
Yeah. Right.
So,
right.
But,
so I've got a quick question for you.
Yeah, fire away.
Who's your favorite golfer from each of these 3 eras? The Feathery, the Gutty, and the Haskell.
Okay. That's a good one. I'm gonna say Alan Robertson from the Feathery. He doesn't get enough credit because obviously he didn't win an Open, but then again, we don't have Opens if he's not that good. So Alan Robertson died in 1859, wildly heralded as the greatest golfer that had ever lived up to that point. He taught might be a hard word. Old Tom Morris apprenticed under Alan Robertson and likely built up his golfing skills, either watching Alan Robertson or defining his work to beat Alan Robertson. So the grand old man of golf is old Tom Morris, revered for certain. But I'd like to give the nod to his predecessor, Alan Robertson. Okay, then we get into the Gutty. That's a tough one. I mean, I kind of want to lean towards, man, that's a tough one. It's like, again, it's like picking. So you're
struggling with Young Tom versus one of the Parks?
It's definitely going to be a Park versus Morris argument, and each are equal in its day. I'm going to side with Willie Park Sr., who also, all 3 of them, old Tom Morris, Young Tom, and Park Sr., all won 4 Open championships. But again, I'm going to give it to Park for a similar reason of Alan Robertson. If it weren't for Park's moxie in challenging Alan Robertson and playing these amazing marathon matches for old Tom Morris, which were published across the kingdom, the Open Championship isn't the Open Championship without somebody wearing the black hat. In St. Andrews, that black hat was worn by Willie Park Sr. In Musselburgh, that black hat was worn by old Tom Morris. And our game is basically defined by rivalries. And what better way to throw gasoline on a fire than Willie Park Sr.? So I'm going to give him that. I mean, Harry Vardon would have an amazing argument that would be almost impossible to match. And quite frankly, I probably should have chose him because he actually could be considered the Pied Piper of golf in America when he came over in 1900 with the Gutty still, and kind of blew up, our growth in the United States. We'll switch to the wound ball. I'm going to go for showman over society. So I'm going to go with Walter Hagen. Even though Bobby Jones' club right over here, and I love them both. They're like equals to me. But there's something to be said about Walter Hagen, and I think his gift to golf may even outweigh the Grand Slam and Bobby Jones and of course Augusta National, because he really made the profession of being a golf professional that much more important. He was a catalyst to get golf professionals into the clubhouses where they were banned. He was, quite possibly the first ever golfer to make $1 million. He was making more money than Babe Ruth in his day. He changed the outlook of the professional being this, greedy, drunken caddy into more of a drunken golfing socialite. And then, what? And that's not fair. That's not fair. Here's my contention with Walter Hagen. and I love him dearly. He's in my office as well. I have an oil painting him over here in the corner. And really, Bobby Jones and Walter Hagen are well represented, even though most of my golf is 1800s. But there is a fine misunderstanding of Hagen that I think is portrayed probably more in movies than anything, is that he was kind of like this fat drunk. He was 6 foot, maybe 6'1", 5'11", 6'1", somewhere in there. In his prime, he weighed 180 pounds. So he was not thin, he was muscular. In his prime, he was very careful of what kind of shape he was in. He also was not a heavy drinker. A lot of people think he was.
Really?
He played psychological games of going to bars and, speakeasies with people and being seen. But one historian once said that most of his drink ended up in the fern that was right next to the door. So he'd go through a lot of glasses, but he might not necessarily have been consuming them. Another really cool factoid about Walter Hagen is he is really never to have known to swear. He had a demeanor that was always level-headed. Never hurry, never worry, take time to smell the roses is one of his quotes that I think Ben Hogan used later on in his life too. But, he just had the right attitude. Like, it's okay to miss a shot, right? One miss is not going to define your round. Golf is a game of recovery. And I don't think anybody in the history of the game had that mindset better than him, of that, not to get flustered over a bad shot. A bad shot is always an opportunity.
Right. Well, I think I'm surprised you didn't take Harry Vardon, but I love your argument for Walter Hagen. And, I think, he was known to show up in his tuxedo.
Oh, yeah.
Again, based on what you're saying, that's gamesmanship, not.
Yeah. Well,
and
I think he wanted to show up late to just say, I didn't have to practice. A great story that I just heard the other day, by the way, I'll tell you about Walter Hagen. Walter Hagen was fond of playing my country club in Florida, Bel Air. Bel Air Country Club is the oldest course in Florida, 1897, designed by Donald Ross or redesigned by Donald Ross in 1913, 36 holes. And we are about ready to publish our 125th anniversary book this year. And Hal Bodley, who is writing it, I've helped him with the research, told me the other day that on our world famous 14th hole on the East Course, just to the south of it sat a casino on the water. And it was an illegal casino, mind you. And this illegal casino sat on the water in the 1920s. And they were playing the Florida West Coast Open at Bel Air, which was the first, we were the first course to host it. It was the first course of the PGA Florida swing, which still exists today. And Hagen was in his tuxedo and tails at this casino, which was rather formal, all through the night. And apparently he's down on his luck and he's trying to win his money back when somebody walks in with his limo, probably his limo driver, saying, "We need to get you to the course you tee off in 2 minutes." And so just like that, I guess he gives up on the endeavor trying to win his money, jumps in the limo, drives, 10 blocks. He's got his clubs, walks up to the, first tee in his tuxedo and plays 18 holes in a tuxedo. That's Walter Hagen,
I mean, that's what we need. We need more characters like that, right?
Yeah.
That are swashbucklers, so to speak. Well, I love the story about him at Royal Cinque Ports, where they wouldn't let him into the clubhouse. So he changed his clothes in his chauffeur-driven limousine and, at the foot of the building.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, let's move on to your pod. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you're fine.
I was going to say, let's move on to the podcast. This is, without a doubt, my favorite podcast. I've got a collection of different podcasts. Yours is my favorite. I literally can't get enough of it. I've considered myself a student of golf history, but I learn something every time I listen to you. And it would be unfair of me to ask who your favorite guest is because you might offend someone. But I'll tell you who.
I'll say this. I don't know if there's a favorite. I would say my series with Ben Wright were extremely moving. He's since passed. He wasn't in great health when Von Halyard filmed the last 2 episodes we did with him. And, unbelievable delight to hang around with. He had a walker at the time. I believe his back was broken, wasn't in the greatest of health, and yet, just welcomed us into his house, made us feel welcome. And I think that's one of the coolest things about this podcast is not that I don't think Ben Wright will ever be forgotten, but his voice went quiet there for a while, right? And that's what happens. I mean, I think, my recent interview with Al Geiberger was a fantastic sit down with one of the most polite gentlemen I have ever met in my life. And to have the opportunity to talk to these folks, and they have time to reflect back on their career. It's a totally different interview than if, for instance, I sat down with Tiger Woods today, right? He's in the middle of his career. It's fantastic, whether it's, any of these gentlemen. Dean Beeman was a fascinating one. And just to have them feel free to have a voice and have an opinion and put it out there without, the worry of retribution, right? Of the words they say coming back to haunt them. That's one of the beauties of, being retired, is being able to, say your piece. But I mean, like Ben Wright, I wish you all, I wish you all could have heard the story of, I did the podcast called Ben Wright and the Beatles, which
that was fascinating.
That podcast should literally have 1 million downloads, because it's beyond golf, right? It is literally, the Beatles, and how he basically gave them their first TV appearance, how he dressed them the way they
exactly.
And like, he's telling the story. But the problem is, for everybody who listens to that podcast, is you don't understand how it came about. So I had finished 3 hours maybe of interviewing him, and I'm heading back to Tampa, Florida. I'm packing up my gear, and his wife comes in the room, and she says, "Did you tell Connor how you were the first person to put the Beatles on TV?" Like, drops it like that. And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "No, I didn't talk about it because it's not golf history." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, what?" And so he tells me the story that everybody hears on the podcast, but I don't think, the listener will never know the difference. But the way he told it the first time telling me, it's kind of like, it's almost like an echo, right? If you hear my echo, it's not quite the same as hearing my voice. It comes back a little distorted. And when we came back, I don't know, 3 weeks later, and we had the camera, and, we did the interview, there's not the same level of surprise coming from, the excitement of Ben telling me the story for the first time and me hearing it for the first time. Like, I'm still excited and I still reacted, but it wasn't as, it might not have been as genuine as in the moment where, I just blew up, right? It was like the most amazing story I've ever heard. So,
well, had that Irish tenor not gotten ill or had laryngitis,
God, right? Again, it's kind of like the Open Championship going to Muirfield. Everything changes, right?
Who knows what would have happened to the Beatles? And then him saying, "You can't come on scruffy like that. Take him to the department store and get him some suits."
Yeah, he's like, "You ragamuffins." He's just, I can still hear him saying, like, calling them ragamuffins. And
then after 4 sessions, their manager wants them to pay like £15,000 or some crazy amount of money.
"I don't even like their music." You know what I mean? It was like, and he didn't. It was just so, or like, Harrison trying to give him a Ferrari. He's like, the story is just insane. I'm like, I'll never understand how that doesn't have 1 million downloads, because I just think there's something in that episode for everybody.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the one that got me was, and I'm not asking you to tell me, but I'm assuming he told you, when he punched that guy in the mouth in Texas. Did he tell you who that was?
He did.
Okay.
I can't tell you.
I know.
You have to go with me.
I'm not asking you to, but I turned my buddies onto this, right?
Yeah.
And we're like guessing who it is, right?
Yeah.
And we couldn't even get close. And what I mean by that is, it like, was it Tom Kite? No, Tom Kite wouldn't be.
No, it wasn't a top tier guy, obviously.
But that was hilarious. I'll tell you the other thing he said. What he did to Gary McCord.
Oh, yeah.
It's a funny story, but how rude could you be?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, for those of you who didn't hear the podcast, Ben Wright takes Gary McCord to meet Ben Hogan for the first time. Ben and Ben are good friends.
Yeah.
Ben's actually named himself after Ben Hogan.
Yeah.
Ben
Wright not even his first name. Right.
And he goes, hey, he calls him in advance, says, hey, I want to bring a friend by. And Ben Hogan says, hey, any friend of yours is a friend of mine. They show up. He says, this is Gary McCord. Ben says, what do you do for a living?
Yeah.
I play on the PGA Tour. Never heard of you. How long have you been out there? 18 years. Never heard of you. How many times have you won?
Yeah.
I haven't won yet. Then what the F are you doing out there? And walked around and never said another word to him.
Just walks.
My mouth was agape. I'm like, that's hilarious. But in a later podcast, I guess it was, you talked, I mean, he wasn't the friendliest guy.
Yeah.
Right.
You had to be in his circle, right?
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best way to put it. And I think, he was blunt. Let's face it. Ben Hogan, won 9 majors. I think he won, I'm going to screw this up, but maybe 50 events, maybe it's 70. And I think it's like 50 events. And I don't think he could ever have imagined himself playing on the PGA Tour without, winning. I think he would have done something else,
Yeah.
He probably would have been like a prison warden or something. I don't think you'd ever want to cross that thing,
Right.
Well, I'll say, cut of that same cloth, I think you might say Clifford Roberts was the same kind of way. Rough around the edges, you do it my way, or we're not going to have this conversation. There's other things you could probably say about Clifford Roberts, but I think from a personality standpoint, they might be very close. And Ben got along with both of them, fantastically.
Well, Ben Wright's story about how he got hired by Cliff Roberts is fascinating.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, Ben Wright had a fascinating life. And the story that he told that as a child, how they would rob the downed aircraft and sell the parts and take the German pilots' wallets and medals. And can you imagine your children or children today?
No. And there were, that was one of those times where, it's, I don't know if it was uncomfortable, but it was such, an odd discussion. And it was fascinating, but it's like, he's basically taking stuff off of a dead man, right?
Right.
And we've never lived in, fortunately in the United States, we've never lived in a world that's had enemy combatants other than the Civil War crash their planes on our country and, gone into a spiral like that. So, I'm trying to put myself in that perspective, and try to handle it.
Well, the only reason they stopped was that the one plane exploded.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
right?
they would have kept going for sure.
Yeah.
But again, they're also in a, they were also suffering a Great Depression. And if you could sell things to help out the family, there's all these different considerations that, come into play there.
Yeah. I felt the same way you did, Connor. When I'm listening to it, it's a little unsettling. Like these are dead soldiers, right?
Yeah.
But you need to put it in the proper context of the time. They were Nazis.
Yeah.
And
100%.
I want to move on to Tony Jacklin, who was, I can't believe how honest he was.
Oh, wow. Right.
His stories are fascinating and about how he became a golfer. But when he calls out Dan Sykes and Bob Golby and a couple of others for not wanting them on tour, and how Dan Sykes said, hey, I was playing here last year with the leader and he hit it in the water and then he hits it in the water. You're like, what? That's an a-hole.
I know.
Who would do that?
There's a long history of I'd say bad American behavior towards the Euros that goes way back further than that. I think we've always, I mean, it's changed now, clearly, right? We got Rory's on our tour now all the time, but, back then and even before, it was looked upon as our tour, don't come over here. And Tony Jacklin coming over as, this bright spot, two-time, major winner, Ryder Cup champion, hero, if you will. I think he saw the last grasp of, I don't know if you want to call it colonialism or anything like that, or hate towards colonialism or something like that. But I think he saw the last gasp of, this is America and this is our tour. Since then, fortunately, we've become a worldwide tour with people playing from almost every country. But you're not going to get that insight from anybody who is, playing on tour today, or, in the commentator booth. There's too much risk to put those kind of stories out there. So,
well, when you listen to Tiger,
it's really eye-opening.
Yeah, I agree with you. If you listen to Tiger this week or Sunday, they had him on the tournament at Riviera, and he doesn't share anything. He's so guarded. It's like, it's not even interesting, right? Yeah. And the announcers too, I think when they get to be the age of Ben Wright, when he did those interviews with you or Tony Jacklin, they'll share things. But I'll tell you what,
I will say this. Let me give you a fault of mine. And I put a lot of thought into this because I did, my friend Ben Hogan with Ben Wright. We did obviously the Beatles show. We did the Life and Times of Ben Wright. So we did hours of interview, and I did bring up in one of those interviews the elements that ended his career. I'll say I probably didn't press hard enough. You know what I mean? I think I'm not a journalist, so maybe I get away with this, but I think I probably could have pushed a little deeper into his feelings about how that happened, what happened. He talks a little bit about it. Do you have any remorse for it? I probably could have pressed harder, now that I'm in my fourth season of the podcast. At the same time, the element of the show also has to fit the questions that are asked. And it was mentioned, I did mention it, but at the same time.
Yeah, but I think, Connor, in your defense, you're in his home, his wife's there.
I could have gone deeper there. I think I probably should have gone deeper. But it's not going to change what happened or how, I would say, how he responded. You're also dealing with somebody who was not in great health, not to make excuses, but, I didn't receive any criticism from it, but I know I juggled that during the interview of how hard to press, and, kind of made a judgment call. And I think I look back at podcasts sometimes, and I think that's one of them where I might have asked one more question.
Yeah. The other, I'm gonna name some of the podcasts that I really enjoyed. Yeah. The birth and death of golf in America was great. The Willie Park Sr. stuff was excellent. The old Tom, young Tom stuff was excellent. Herbert Warren Wind, I'm in the middle of that one now. I'm loving that.
That's a good guy.
And I talked about, I listened to all three of the Ben Wrights, the Tony Jacklin. Al Geiberger, I have to tell you, I was living in Seattle. He was living there. And there was an indoor golf trainer. This was like the first online golf trainer. So you would go to, it was called Bogart Golf. You would go to their facility in Redmond. You would get a lesson from a PGA master professional.
Right.
And then you could view it online.
Oh, wow. Right? Cool.
So I'm taking lessons from this guy. His name's Chuck Notestone. And in walks Al Geiberger and his son, who was probably 12 at the time. This would have been like 1998, so 24 years ago. Yeah. And so I'm standing there. I meet him. Very nice guy. And I swear to God, this is true. I'm watching him. So then he starts hitting some balls.
Yeah.
And he says, hey, can you tell me what you think of this move? Right. And Chuck is saying, well, I don't remember what he said, but you're too inside or whatever. And he worked with him. Next week, he won.
Oh, wow. That's pretty good, right?
I mean, but golf is like that, right? It could be just one little thing at that level of shooting 74 or 69. It could be one little thing. But the thing that I found fascinating, I mean, the whole thing was fascinating, the interview with Al Geiberger. But the fact that he finished 15 under and never shot in the 60s.
It's insane, right?
I mean, talk about great golf trivia. How do you?
Yeah, it'll never be matched. That's a crazy stat. Crazy stat. You know, that interview, when you do the editing process, you don't kind of hear all the things that went through it. Al was fantastic, a delightful person. Next time I'm in Palm Springs, I'm going to take him out to dinner. But we were doing this interview at La Quinta Country Club. And by the way, this is no fault other than my own. So I'm putting the onus on me before I say this. But so we're doing the interview and we're in the board meeting or in the boardroom. And we know that at 4:00, the board members are going to come in. So I know my timetable. And they warned me, like, the head of the board might come in a little early, just to let me know. So we're kind of in the process of like winding down the interview, but I've got like at least two more critical questions. And Al's, really going on about one of the questions. And I'm, trying to get it, like, we got to get going, but it's so good. I don't want to cut him off. And the door opens the boardroom. Some of it, I think if you listen really well, you might hear some of this on the podcast. But so the door opens a little bit and it's, I assume, the president of the club. And he pokes his head in and he's like, what's going on in here? And like, Al stops. I'm like, oh, we're doing a podcast. This, Al Geiberger, talking golf history, all this stuff. And he's like, okay. And so then he just walks in. And again, it's his boardroom, not mine. So he sits down and I ask Al another question. And the president, like literally when Al's answering, goes, hey, Al, where do you live now? Like right in the middle of the question. So, Al stops and he answers the question. And then we go back and Al's starting to, answer the question for the podcast. And the gentleman goes, hey, Al, what do you shoot nowadays? You still playing golf? I mean, like it became two interviews at the same time. And so finally, we kind of wrapped up. And I think, then the other board members are coming in and I'm trying to get Al out of there because I'm just trying to be, grateful for their time. And they wanted to talk to Al Geiber. I mean, it's Al Geiber, right? Mr. 59. And so Al is just the nicest person in the world, like wants to give them all, an hour of his time. And, he is the most delightful person. He is probably one of the kindest people I've ever interviewed.
Yeah. Well, I need to wind down. I need to wind this one down. Yeah. Because I've got a 1:30 meeting, but there are some, I'll send you an email with a couple of questions because when we post this, I'd like to get your take on a couple of more things.
Sure.
Actually, I'll send you one question. The final question that I'll ask is is there anything left on your golf bucket list?
Oh, wow. First of all, I don't have bucket lists. I never have. I don't know if that's helped or hurt me. I've been able to play a lot of great courses. Most of the great courses that people would name, I've played them already, so that's been great. I'll give you two. So one, I have yet to play Shinnecock Hills. I'd love to have that opportunity. And then given the time of day, the opportunity to walk the course to see if I could find the layout of the original holes that held the first US Open hosted by Shinnecock. So I'd love that. Second of all is a bucket list, if you'd call it, an item that I plan on doing, maybe even as soon as this year, is I want to take the show on the road to Scotland and film some shows over there, two of which I have in mind. But one I'll tell you is called A Golf Historian's Guide to. So in other words, it's a golf historian's guide to St. Andrews. So we go to St. Andrews and possibly film and record on location. And we talk about all those things, those pieces of history that aren't on the golf course, that surround the golf course, that shape the history of the golf course and golf in St. Andrews, and just tell people a different type of history outside of the, young Tom Morris and old Tom Morris and all the great opens that have been played there. I think that'd be fascinating for me. I just think, and I'd love it for the golf too. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, going over Scotland's one of the great things you can do as a golfer. It should be a pilgrimage that every true great golfer tries to do in their lifetime. And to get another deeper level of that history in a podcast would be sublime for me.
What about, what would you think they'll let you film inside the RNA?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I know a couple members. I thought you were going to say, do you think they'd make you a member of the RNA? And I was like, that would be great. That would be great. No, I don't know if they will or not. I don't think any one given show would be, locked in step with having to film there. I would listen, if I didn't get to have a camera in there, I would be fine just to walk it. I'll be honest with you. I've been to Scotland a couple times, and in both cases, one with my father and one with my a couple friends, neither of them, we had invitations to go inside the RNA clubhouse, but of course you wear a jacket. And my dad was like, yeah, I don't feel like wearing a jacket. I was like, Dad, it's the RNA. Like, let's get this tour. Let's just go get some food. It was kind of his mindset. So I'm broken.
Well,
I'm still broken.
I've got a very good friend who's a member. As a matter of fact, we had him on the podcast, and I've been in there several times. And this past summer, my girlfriend and I spent the entire summer in St. Andrews, and we rented a house 150 yards from the old course. And we went over one day and had lunch with him, and it never gets old going through there. I mean, you'll be blown away by the artwork, And well, if you do need an in, let me know. I can connect you with my buddy.
Okay. I'd say between that and seeing the archives of the University of St. Andrews would be the two things that I would love to see on my next trip to St. Andrews.
Well, but in there you'll see the grave sites of Old Tom and Young Tom. You'll have Ochterlony's and Old Tom's shop and the homes that they lived in, and I mean, a tour of the bunkers and how some of them got their names. And I mean, it's certainly more than one podcast, right? You could do.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I've done maybe two podcasts that had elements of St. Andrews. I mean, it's an infinite amount of history at St. Andrews to dive into. I mean, as noticed by some of the great golf books that have come out of that unbelievable city, right? Roger McStravick is a great friend of mine, and every year to 2 years he's writing a new book about the history of St. Andrews, which I find fascinating every single time. There's a new book with new elements and things you didn't know, and history from a golf standpoint, it's one of our oldest sports. It's almost an infinite amount of information to be studied.
Right. Have you met David Joy?
I have not. No. Oh no, I have. I met him. He came to a USGA symposium at Pinehurst years ago, decades ago. I gave a speech on Hagen's Last Hurrah, which was the story of Hagen's tour in 1929, where he played in the Ryder Cup and won his last major championship. And David was there. I met him there. Unbelievable gentleman.
We hired him probably 15 years ago. We had a final. Every year we give out a replica of the claret jug to the winner of our final day little tournament.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And we had it at this really nice restaurant called the Pete Inn. And I paid him what was the equivalent of $900 to come in full regalia. And he had a caddy with him.
Yeah.
And he never broke
Tom Morris, right?
As old Tom Morris. He never broke character, including when I was paying him in the parking lot.
Right.
I mean, he never came out of, it was fascinating. Anyway, I hate to cut this short.
No, it's all right. We'll do it again another time if you want.
Connor, this was outstanding. I'll follow up with you with one last question so that we can put that in the header of the podcast. But you were fantastic, and keep doing what you're doing. We'll share as well how they can reach out to you and
you bet.
And how they can listen to the podcast. Excellent. Really.
Thank you for saying that. It's, I think you probably know I was doing a podcast and we were mentioning before, it can be a grind, especially when you try to get a podcast out every 2 weeks. And I go through these, valleys and peaks. And sometimes you're like, is it worth it? And then you hear something like this and it reminds you that people enjoy it outside of the work that you put into it,
Right.
So it's,
what you need is an assistant like Hayden to do it for you.
Hayden, come on over. Come down to Tampa. It's nice and warm.
Well, that was a pleasure talking with Connor today. We want to thank him again for coming on the podcast. If you guys enjoyed it, please share this video and podcast. If you're ready to take on your own trip to the British Isles, visit our website, royallinksgolftours.com. Fill out the custom vacation customization form, and we'll start planning your unforgettable trip. See you next week.